Video 9. Parameters. It is possible to parameterize the cylinder via the parameter data and to operate it via IO link. The process data, especially the overwrites, refer to the values parameterized here. The parameter data remains stored in the cylinder. In this way, the cylinder can also be controlled digitally, and the parameterized values also apply here. We now go through the data. Here we see max speed in and max speed out. The data are normally set to 0, and I will now show how to overwrite them. We have set the two values to 0 and write the changed values to the electric cylinder via the computer. And 0 does not mean 0 speed in this case, but that the potentiometers are active. If the value 0 is overwritten, the corresponding potentiometer no longer has any effect. The cylinder moves at exactly this value. If we operate the cylinder digitally, the potentiometers are active, or the speed that we specify applies. In modes 3 and 4, this means mode 3 for retracting and mode 4 for extending. For free positioning, we have our own values, and when these are set to 0, then the bit is read out. If you move the cylinder in mode 5 or 6, in elaboration, in free positioning, the above values have no influence because there are separate parameters for the force and the speed. I can define the maximum force here. Then we have the possibility here to define accelerations and decelerations in meters per second squared, what the cylinder should do. Then we can define the drag error, and via false or true, in tracking error monitoring, determine whether we want to monitor that or not. Normally this function is switched off because we built the cylinder to be resistant, and even if it generates a lot of tracking errors, this does not upset the cylinder or the controller, and is therefore a robust actuator in our customers' machines. If you run two cylinders in parallel, then it makes sense to define the error tracking relatively small, how large the tracking error should be, and that you also monitor it here. The position tolerance for status feedback says from which tolerance the command I have defined is fulfilled. I now want to move to 55.5 millimeters. As soon as 55.4 is reached, I will know whether the command has been carried out, provided I have set it to tenths. The last tenth is of course also executed. It just gives me the command so that, for example, subsequent processes can start from then on. Here we have the end switches and their tolerance. By default, plus minus 2 millimeters is set here. This means that 2 millimeters before the end signal, the end switch already starts to give the signal that it is now active. I can set this freely. For example, I can set it to 1/10 or to 5 millimeters. Here, in addition to teaching the hub via user mode 2, we can set the hub to 100.3 millimeters, for example. We can also set the hub to be only 50 millimeters. Using the free positioning, you can never go beyond the stroke that is in here. So I can't approach 60 millimeters, but only 50 millimeters. We have the possibility to set end position in or end position out, which are currently at 0 millimeters. For example, I can say that we don't want to start at 0 millimeters, but have the stroke in the range between 30 and 50 millimeters. By default, this is set to 0. Limit switch extended will have the same position as limit position out. Normally, I get a signal as soon as I start mode 2. Here, the limit switches are stored at the end positions of the hub. The sensor positions of the two limit switches can be freely parameterized. So it is also possible that we use the limit switches to approach intermediate positions in digital mode. If the signal is recognized by the PLC, it can interrupt the move command, and the cylinder breaks immediately and stops at the intermediate position. We can operate the cylinder with 24 or 48 volts, available. We can reprogram the cylinder from omnistable to bistable, but this only has a digital influence and no influence on the I/O link. Here I can tell the cylinder whether it should retract or extend first when homing. And then, down there, we have a few reserved variables where you can program in travel sets in the future. These are still under development at the moment.